April 10, 1981, West Point, New York. General Omar Bradley, 88 years old, confined to a wheelchair, sits across from a military historian in his study. The tape recorder is running. Bradley's hands shake as he pours himself a glass of water. The historian asks the question everyone has wanted to ask for 36 years. General, what really happened with Patton in 1945? Bradley stares at the wall for a full minute. Doesn't speak. Doesn't move. Just stares. Then he says something that will remain classified for 2 more years. George was right. About everything. The Russians. Berlin. The end of the war. We stopped him. And it cost us the Cold War. The historian's pen freezes mid-sentence. Bradley continues. I've carried this for 36 years. Kept my mouth shut. Followed orders. Protected reputations. But I'm 88 years old. I'll be dead soon. And someone needs to know the truth. What Bradley revealed in that interview, finally published in 1983 after his death, would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the end of World War II, about Patton's death, about the decisions that shaped the next 50 years. This is what he said. Omar Nelson Bradley was born February 12, 1893 in Clark, Missouri. Poor family. Father was a school teacher who died when Omar was 14. His mother took in sewing to pay the bills. Omar was quiet, studious, good at mathematics. Not the type you'd expect to become a general. He attended West Point, class of 1915, the class the stars fell on, 59 graduates. Of those, 59 would become generals. Eisenhower was in that class. So was Joseph McNarney. So were dozens of the men who would lead the American military through 2 world wars. Bradley graduated 44th out of 164 cadets. Respectable but not outstanding. He was competent, reliable, the kind of officer who followed orders and didn't make waves. Eisenhower graduated 61st. Also respectable, also reliable. They became friends at West Point. Not close friends, but they respected each other. Both were Midwesterners. Both came from nothing. Both understood that the Army was their ticket to something better. After graduation, Bradley spent 25 years in peacetime assignments, infantry posts, training schools, staff positions. He never saw combat in World War I, never led troops in battle. By 1941, he was a colonel, 48 years old. Most officers his age were preparing to retire. Then came Pearl Harbor. The Army needed leaders, experienced officers who could train the massive conscript force America was building. Bradley got promoted, brigadier general, then major general. By 1943, he was in North Africa commanding the II Corps. Finally, at age 50, Omar Bradley was going to war. That's where he met George Patton. Again, they'd known each other at West Point. Patton had been 2 classes ahead. They'd crossed paths over the years at various posts, but they'd never worked together, never really talked. Patton was everything Bradley wasn't: flamboyant, aggressive, controversial. Patton wore custom uniforms with ivory-handled pistols. Bradley wore standard-issue everything. Patton screamed at his men and slapped soldiers he thought were cowards. Bradley spoke quietly and led by example. Patton believed in aggressive offensive action at all costs. Bradley believed in careful planning and minimizing casualties. They were opposites, and for 2 years they worked together brilliantly. Patton commanded the 3rd Army, Bradley commanded the 12th Army Group. Patton was the sword, Bradley was the hand that guided it. Sicily, France, the race across Europe, Patton's tanks smashing through German lines, Bradley's logistics keeping them supplied. It worked because Bradley gave Patton freedom, let him attack, let him take risks, trusted him to deliver results, and Patton delivered. The 3rd Army moved faster and fought harder than any American force in history, 600 miles in 6 months, across France, into Germany, destroying everything in their path. But there was tension, always tension. Patton wanted to keep going, wanted to drive straight to Berlin, take the German capital before the Soviets, end the war on American terms. Bradley said no. Eisenhower said no. The orders from Washington said no. Berlin had been promised to Stalin at Yalta. The Allied advance would stop at the Elbe River. Let the Russians take Berlin. Let them have Eastern Europe. We'll take the West. Division of Europe. Clean. Simple. Politically convenient. Patton exploded. "This is insane," he told Bradley in April 1945. "We're handing half of Europe to Stalin. The Russians are barbarians. They'll enslave everyone they occupy. We can take Berlin in 3 weeks. We're 50 miles away. The Third Army can be there before the Soviets even cross the Oder." Bradley listened, then repeated the orders. "We stop at the Elbe. Those are Eisenhower's orders. Those are Washington's orders." Patton didn't accept it, kept pushing, kept arguing, sent proposals up the chain. "We need to fight the Russians now, while we're strong, while they're exhausted. If we wait, we'll regret it." He was ignored, overruled, told to stand down. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe, shook hands, took photographs, celebrated victory. Patton didn't celebrate. He saw what was happening in the occupied zones: Soviet troops raping, looting, murdering civilians, NKVD secret police arresting anyone suspected of anti-Soviet sentiment, entire populations being shipped east to labor camps. The Iron Curtain was descending, exactly as Patton had predicted. He started talking, to reporters, to other officers, to anyone who would listen. "We fought the wrong enemy," he said. "We should have let Germany and Russia destroy each other, then gone in and picked up the pieces. Instead, we allied with Stalin, the biggest murderer in history, and now he owns half of Europe." The press loved it, controversial, provocative. Patton being Patton. But Washington was furious. Truman wanted cooperation with the Soviets, the United Nations, collective security. Patton was undermining everything. Eisenhower, now military governor of occupied Germany, was embarrassed. He'd commanded Patton. They were friends. But Patton was becoming a political liability. In September 1945, Eisenhower called Patton to headquarters. "You need to stop talking," he said. "You're causing problems." Patton refused. "Someone has to tell the truth." Eisenhower relieved him, removed Patton from command of the Third Army, reassigned him to the 15th Army, a paper command, no troops, no authority, just supervising the writing of after-action reports. A humiliation. Patton was 60 years old, the most successful American combat commander of the war, and he'd been demoted to a desk job because he wouldn't shut up about the Soviets. Bradley watched it happen, said nothing. He agreed with Eisenhower's decision, publicly supported it. Patton was out of control. The political situation required careful diplomacy. Patton didn't do careful, he did blunt force, so he had to go. But privately, Bradley had doubts. He saw the same things Patton saw: Soviet aggression, broken promises, the occupation of Eastern Europe turning into annexation. Maybe Patton was right. Maybe they should have kept going in 1945, taken Berlin, faced down Stalin while they had the advantage. But orders were orders. Policy was policy. Bradley was a good soldier. He followed orders. December 9th, 1945. Patton was driving near Mannheim, Germany. His car collided with a U.S. Army truck. Patton was thrown forward, struck his head on a partition in the vehicle, broke his neck, paralyzed from the neck down. He lingered for 12 days. Died December 21st, 1945, age 60. The official story was simple: traffic accident, tragic, unfortunate. One of America's greatest generals dying just months after victory. The funeral was in Luxembourg, full military honors. Eisenhower gave the eulogy. Bradley attended, stood in the rain and watched them lower Patton into the ground. And something bothered him. Something about the accident. Something about the timing. Patton had been planning to return to the United States. Planning to retire. Planning to write a book. Planning to speak publicly about what he'd seen in Europe. About the Soviets. About the mistakes the Allies had made. And then, conveniently, He died. Bradley pushed the thought away. Conspiracy theories, paranoia. Patton died in a car accident. Nothing more. But the thought never completely left. The Cold War started officially in 1947. The Truman Doctrine, containment, the Marshall Plan. Everything Patton had warned about came true. Soviet expansion, communist takeovers in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany, the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, the arms race, nuclear brinksmanship. For 40 years, the world lived under the threat of annihilation because two superpowers couldn't coexist. And Bradley knew that Patton had been right, knew that stopping at the Elbe had been a mistake, knew that the decisions made in 1945 had created the nightmare of 1947 and everything after. But he didn't say anything, couldn't say anything. He was still in the army, still following orders, still protecting reputations, his own included. Bradley became Army Chief of Staff in 1948, then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1949. The first man to hold that position, 5 stars, the highest rank in the American military. He oversaw the Korean War, advised Truman and Eisenhower, became one of the most respected military leaders in American history, the soldier's general, calm, competent, reliable. Everything Patton wasn't. But inside, the doubt was eating at him. Every time he read about Soviet aggression, every time another country fell to communism, every time nuclear war seemed imminent, he thought about Patton, thought about April 1945, thought about the decision to stop at the Elbe. What if they hadn't stopped? What if they'd kept going? What if they'd listened to Patton? Would the world be different? Would millions of people in Eastern Europe be free instead of enslaved? Would there be no Cold War? No Korea? No Vietnam? No threat of nuclear holocaust? He'd never know. Because they'd made their choice. And they'd have to live with it. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching this from. Somewhere that was free in 1945 and still is? Or somewhere that wasn't so lucky? Bradley retired from active duty in 1953, kept busy with corporate boards and veterans organizations, wrote his autobiography, A Soldier's Story, published in 1951. It was cautious, diplomatic, praised Eisenhower, praised the Allied strategy, mentioned Patton respectfully, but briefly, said nothing controversial, nothing about Berlin, nothing about the Soviets, nothing about the doubts that kept him awake at night. The book was a bestseller. Bradley was celebrated as a hero, the last 5-star general, the man who'd helped win World War II, but he wasn't satisfied because he'd told a sanitized version of history, the version that made everyone look good, the version that protected reputations and political careers. Not the truth. The 1960s and 70s brought new revelations, declassified documents, memoirs from other officers, historians asking harder questions. What really happened at the end of the war? Why did the Allies stop at the Elbe? Why didn't they take Berlin? Why did they hand Eastern Europe to Stalin? The official answers were always the same: military necessity, political agreements, the need for Allied unity. But some historians weren't buying it. They'd found evidence. Churchill had wanted to keep going, had proposed Operation Unthinkable, a plan to attack the Soviet Union in July 1945, drive them out of Eastern Europe. The plan was rejected. Too risky, too expensive. The American public wouldn't support another war, so they accepted Soviet domination of half of Europe instead. And Patton? Patton had been saying the same things as Churchill, just more bluntly, more publicly. And he'd been silenced, relieved of command, humiliated, and then, 3 months later, dead. The conspiracy theories started in the 1970s. Patton didn't die in an accident. He was assassinated by the OSS, by the Soviets, by someone who wanted him quiet. The theories had no proof, just suspicion, timing, motive, opportunity. But they persisted, and Bradley read them, read every book, every article, every theory, and the doubt grew stronger. In 1979, Bradley had a stroke. Not severe, but enough to scare him. He was 86 years old. How much time did he have left? A year? 2? 5 if he was lucky? He'd carried this burden for 34 years, kept his mouth shut for 34 years, protected the official story for 34 years. But he was running out of time. And the truth was running out of time with him. In 1981, a military historian contacted Bradley. Young man, writing a book about command decisions in World War II. Wanted to interview the last surviving 5-star general. Bradley agreed. They met several times. Formal interviews at first, discussing tactics, strategy, logistics, the things Bradley had talked about 100 times before. But then the historian asked the question. The one Bradley had been waiting for. General, do you think we made a mistake stopping at the Elbe? Bradley was silent for a long time. The tape recorder was running. Every word would be preserved. He could give the standard answer, the political answer, military necessity, Allied agreements, hindsight is 20/20, or he could tell the truth. He looked at the historian, young, idealistic, actually cared about getting history right, not just repeating the official line. Bradley made a decision. Yes, he said, we made a mistake, a catastrophic mistake. The historian leaned forward. Can you elaborate? Bradley took a breath. George Patton wanted to keep going in April 1945, wanted to take Berlin, wanted to push the Soviets back. He saw what was coming, saw that Stalin would never honor the Yalta agreements, that the Soviets would dominate Eastern Europe, that we'd end up in a Cold War that would last decades. We thought he was crazy, reckless, a warmonger. But he was right. About everything. The historian was writing furiously. What did you do? I followed orders, Bradley said. Told Patton to stand down, supported Eisenhower's decision to stop at the Elbe, publicly defended the strategy. And I was wrong. The weight of 36 years of silence was lifting. Bradley kept talking. We could have taken Berlin. The Third Army could have been there in 2 weeks, maybe 3, before the Soviets. We had the forces, we had the momentum. The Germans were collapsing. It would have cost casualties, maybe 10,000, maybe more. But compare that to what the Cold War cost. Korea, 36,000 Americans dead. Vietnam, 58,000 dead. The arms race, the constant threat of nuclear war. Millions of people in Eastern Europe living under Soviet occupation for 45 years. All because we stopped at the Elbe. The historian asked the obvious question. Why did you stop? Bradley's answer was blunt. Politics. Roosevelt and Stalin had agreed at Yalta. Berlin would be in the Soviet zone. Truman inherited that agreement. Didn't want to start a war with our ally. Didn't want to risk American lives for German territory. The public was tired of war. Everyone just wanted it over. So we stopped. Handed Eastern Europe to Stalin and hoped he'd keep his promises. Did you believe he would? No, Bradley said. I didn't. Neither did Churchill. Neither did Patton. We all saw what the Soviets were doing in occupied territory, the atrocities, the deportations. But Washington wanted to believe. Wanted cooperation. Wanted the United Nations and collective security. So we ignored the evidence. What about Patton's death? The historian asked carefully. Bradley stared at him. What about it? Do you think it was really an accident? Bradley was silent again. Longer this time. The tape kept running. I don't know, he finally said. The official investigation concluded it was an accident. I have no evidence to contradict that. But the timing was convenient. Patton was about to retire. About to go public. About to tell everyone what he'd seen, what we'd done, what mistakes we'd made. And then he died. If I were a novelist, I'd call that suspicious. But I'm not a novelist, I'm a soldier. And soldiers deal in facts, not speculation. The historian pressed. But you have doubts? Everyone has doubts, Bradley said. Patton made powerful enemies. He embarrassed the administration, embarrassed Eisenhower. Embarrassed me. He was a liability. People wanted him quiet. Did someone kill him to shut him up? I don't know. I hope not. But I can't rule it out either. The interview continued for 2 more hours. Bradley talked about Eisenhower, their friendship, their disagreements. Ike was a great organizer, Bradley said. A great diplomat. He kept the Allies together, kept the coalition functioning. But he wasn't a field commander. He didn't understand combat the way Patton did. Patton knew how to win battles. Eisenhower knew how to win political arguments. We needed both. But when they disagreed, Eisenhower always won. Because he was supreme commander, and because Washington trusted him more than Patton. Patton was too unpredictable, too honest, too willing to say what everyone else was thinking but wouldn't say out loud. That made him dangerous. And dangerous people don't last in politics. Bradley talked about his own role, his regrets. I was a coward, he said. I saw what was happening, saw that Patton was right, but I didn't speak up. Didn't support him. Didn't risk my career to do what was right. I followed orders, protected my reputation, advanced my career, and millions of people paid the price. The historian tried to soften it. You were following orders. You were a soldier. Bradley cut him off. Following orders is not an excuse. The Nazis followed orders. We hanged them at Nuremberg for following orders. I'm not comparing myself to them. But I'm not excusing myself either. I knew better. I did nothing. That's on me. The interview ended. The historian left with hours of tape, explosive material, revelations that would rewrite World War II history. But there was a problem. Bradley made the historian promise. You can't publish this while I'm alive. I've said things that will destroy reputations, hurt people I care about. I need to be dead before this comes out. Can you wait? The historian promised. Bradley died April 8, 1981, 2 weeks after the interview. The historian kept his promise. Didn't publish immediately. Spent 2 years fact-checking, cross-referencing, making sure everything Bradley said could be verified. In 1983, the interview was published. A military history quarterly article. 15 pages, transcripts of Bradley's statements, analysis, context. The reaction was explosive. Veterans groups were outraged. How dare Bradley criticize Eisenhower? How dare he second-guess decisions made under wartime pressure? How dare he give credence to conspiracy theories about Patton's death? Historians were divided. Some said Bradley was finally telling the truth, confirming what many had suspected. Others said he was an old man rewriting history to absolve his guilt, revising his role to look better in hindsight. The debate continues. What's certain is this. Bradley carried the weight of those decisions for 36 years, kept silent for 36 years, and finally, at the end of his life, he spoke the truth. Whether that truth was accurate or just his perception doesn't change the fact that he believed it. Believed that stopping at the Elbe was a mistake. Believed that Patton was right. Believed that the Cold War could have been prevented. Here's what we know for certain. In April 1945, Patton's Third Army was 50 miles from Berlin. The Soviets were 200 miles away. Patton asked for permission to continue the advance. He was ordered to stop. Berlin was taken by the Soviets in May 1945 after brutal fighting. 80,000 Soviet soldiers died taking the city. The Americans could have taken it with far fewer casualties, but they weren't allowed to try. Why? Official reason was political agreements with Stalin. Yalta Conference. Division of Germany. Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. These were decisions made at the highest levels. Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin. Not military decisions, political decisions. And Patton, the soldier, disagreed. He wanted to keep fighting, not against Germany, against the Soviet Union. He saw them as the real enemy, the real threat, and he was willing to say it publicly. That made him uncontrollable, unacceptable, dangerous. So he was removed from command, and 3 months later, he was dead. Bradley knew all of this, watched it happen, participated in it, and regretted it for the rest of his life. The interview revealed something else, Bradley's opinion of Eisenhower. In public, Bradley always praised Ike, called him a great leader, a great friend. But in the 1981 interview, the truth came out. Eisenhower was a politician in uniform, Bradley said. He made decisions based on what was politically acceptable, not what was militarily necessary. He wanted to be president someday, and presidents don't take controversial positions. So he played it safe, stopped at the Elbe, removed Patton, followed Washington's orders, and became president in 1953. Patton never would have been president. He was too blunt, too controversial, too unwilling to compromise. But he would have made different decisions in 1945, and maybe those decisions would have prevented 50 years of Cold War. We'll never know. Because Patton died, and Eisenhower became president, and Bradley kept quiet until 1981, when he finally told the truth, or his version of it. There's another angle to this story, the personal relationship between Bradley, Eisenhower, and Patton. These weren't just generals making strategic decisions. They were men, friends, rivals, colleagues who'd spent years working together under unimaginable pressure. Bradley and Eisenhower were Midwestern, practical, cautious. They understood politics, understood that winning the war wasn't just about military victory. It was about managing alliances, keeping the coalition together, avoiding conflicts with the Soviets. Patton didn't care about any of that. He cared about winning, about destroying the enemy. First the Germans, then the Soviets. He saw war as simple. Find the enemy, kill the enemy, win. Politics was someone else's problem. That attitude made him a brilliant tactical commander, but it made him impossible to control at the strategic level. And it made him dangerous when the war ended and politics became everything. Bradley understood this. He was caught between his friendship with Eisenhower and his respect for Patton's military ability. He chose Eisenhower, chose the political path, chose his career over his conscience, and it haunted him for 36 years. The conspiracy theories about Patton's death won't go away, because the circumstances are suspicious. He died in a low-speed collision. His injuries were severe but survivable. He was paralyzed but conscious. Doctors said he might recover. Then he suddenly died 12 days later. Official cause was pulmonary embolism, blood clot to the lungs, common complication with paralysis. But was it natural? Or assisted? We'll never know. The investigation was brief, concluded it was an accident, case closed. But questions remain. Why was Patton traveling in an unarmored vehicle? Why was there no security? Why did the Army truck involved in the collision disappear immediately after? Why were there no witnesses except the drivers? The OSS, predecessor to the CIA, had the capability to arrange accidents. They'd done it before, they'd do it again. Did they do it to Patton? No evidence, just suspicion. Bradley's interview gave those theories new life, because Bradley admitted he had doubts. The most credible military leader of his generation, a man who'd worked directly with Patton, who'd been there when the decisions were made. He had doubts. That's significant. It doesn't prove anything, but it suggests that even the people who should know the truth aren't certain. Here's the bottom line. Patton wanted to fight the Soviets in 1945. Bradley and Eisenhower said no. Patton was removed from command. Patton died 3 months later. The Cold War started 2 years later. Everything Patton predicted came true. Soviet expansion, communist takeovers, nuclear standoff, 50 years of global tension, millions dead in proxy wars. Bradley admitted in 1981 that stopping at the Elbe was a mistake, that Patton was right, that the decisions made in 1945 created the nightmare that followed, and he carried that guilt until he died. That's the story. Not a conspiracy, not a cover-up, just flawed men making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure, and then living with the consequences. Bradley lived with them for 36 years, kept silent for 36 years, protected reputations for 36 years, and then, at the end, he told the truth. Because someone had to. Because history deserves honesty. Even when that honesty is painful, even when it destroys legends, even when it reveals that the heroes we celebrate made mistakes that cost millions of lives. That's what Bradley's 1981 interview did. It peeled back the myth, showed the reality, the doubts, the regrets, the weight of command decisions that shaped the world. Patton was right. Bradley knew it. Eisenhower probably knew it. But they couldn't admit it. Not in 1945. Not while building political careers. Not while protecting the official narrative of Allied victory and cooperation. Only at the very end, when death was close and reputation didn't matter anymore, did Bradley speak the truth. George was right. About everything,